Last week we have we left a few more slides of lesson 3, so we'll be covering that as well. So before that, we'll start off as usual with our summary, and then we'll move on to that. So this week, what we are going to cover is money market and money market instruments. And before that, we'll go through the summary for last week. So last week we went through some fundamentals of financial markets, both debt markets and equity market related fundamentals, but we didn't have time to run through the equity fundamentals. So in terms of the debt market, we were going through interest rate. We studied what the significance of interest rate in financial market is, what kind of role it plays. And then we went through nominal and real interest rates, how the calculations are done based on Fisher equation and what it means. Then we studied the ways of calculating interest, the basic simple interest and the compound interest. And after that, we went to a more theoretical area where we began to analyze and study on the interest rate, how it's determined in the market. So we studied two theories. What were the two theories? We studied on loanable fund theory and the liquidity preference theory. The loanable fund theory, the key term was loanable funds, demand and supply for loanable funds. In terms of liquidity preference, we studied the preference to hold money balances. So we had supply of money and the demand for money balances. And based on that, how the equilibrium was identified. If the equilibrium interest rate, how it's arrived at, if the interest rate in the market is above the equilibrium interest rate, what would happen? We studied that if it's above the equilibrium point, interest rate is higher, which means supply is more, demand is less. At that situation, we'll have an excess supply, a surplus liquidity in the market. Then we understood slowly but surely interest rate would move down towards the equilibrium. So market reaches the equilibrium point. Similarly, if the market rate is below the equilibrium rate, which means demand is higher because interest rates are low and supply is low because they are not willing to lend at a lower rate. In such a situation, we have excess demand situation. In other words, there's a shortage in terms of liquidity in the market. At that time, what happens? Surely interest rate will start moving up till it matches equilibrium and the shortage is fulfilled. Okay. Then we moved on to study two specific concepts, risk structure and term structure. How did we come to this? We saw that different securities had different interest rates. Okay. So we wanted to analyze why these different securities had different interest rates. So then we understood there are securities with the same maturity but had different interest rates. So we studied that using risk structure. We studied why that reason was, what caused that phenomena using the risk structure. And then we had term structure. What did we identify in that? We identified the same security. That means it had the same credit, the liquidity characteristics and the risk characteristics, but still it had different maturities. And because of that, it had different interest rates. And what caused it? So there, under term structure, we studied yield curve. It's the graphical representation of plotting the interest rates against the maturities. And then we identified the types of yield curves. We had positive, upward sloping, downward sloping or inverted, the flat curve or the humped or the bell curve. The four types we studied. And then we studied the theories. Four separate theories that were explaining these shapes. So we studied expectations theory, liquidity premium theory. Please be careful. So many students confuse liquidity preference with liquidity premium. Liquidity preference is your preference, willingness to hold money balances. That's used in determining interest rates. Here what we are talking about a premium that you're paid because you're foregoing liquidity. Here, the key term is liquidity premium. So we studied that theory as well. Then we moved on to market segmentation theory and the preferred habitat theory. Okay, is there any comments? If there is any comments, please put across if there is anything unclear. So these were the 4 theories. In this week's note, I have included a summary for you. This is this week's note. In that note, I would have inserted a summary for you to study it, to have these 4 theories in more concise manner. So I would have differentiated it based on key assumption, the implication, what this theory is telling us, and different aspects which makes these 4 theories different. So you can, this is like a summary of the 4, easier for you all to study. So you all can go through that. And then after that, we studied the significance and the users of yield curve. Using the yield curve, what can we study at? What can we use it for? Those characteristics we identified, we can get underpriced, overpriced securities, the riding the yield curve concept. About 5 users we studied. And then we moved on to whether interest rates can be negative. Because that was a phenomenon, there was a concept that was going through even on a global scale, talking about whether interest rates need to be negative in order to boost the economy. So we studied that, what that means, what kind of a short-term good that it could do to the economy, but what kind of a long-term consequences that it can cause. So those areas I ask you to go through in detail because it's a recently talked about topic. So that it can be an area that can be tested. So go through that. And then what we couldn't cover was stock market efficiency. So we will go through that today. So this was the last week. If you have, just please open up the last week's slides. If you can download it. I think we, as I recall, we stopped after discussing this slide. So we'll be starting off from here. If you can please open up that. I think you all have access to it. Okay, so stock market efficiency. So we went through the debt market theory related fundamentals, and now we are going to go through about a fundamental theory that we talked about when it comes to stock market or the equity market. Now, equity market, what you need to know is a market where equity instruments are traded. So basically shares are traded. We studied when we were studying about the classification of financial markets that shares don't have a particular maturity period. So it's always long term. You have to hold it and only upon selling you can realize your investment. Okay. So when it comes to shares and the current market price, the current value of a share is equal to the present value of the future expected dividends. Okay. So what it means is the share you hold, how much is it worth? It depends on the future cash inflows that it will generate for you. Okay. So when you say future dividends we know, we studied again under classifications that it's not mandatory to issue dividends and it is dependent on the profitability of the company. If the company is profitable enough, they are able to issue a dividend. If it's a loss period, they might omit from issuing a dividend. So dividend directly depends on profitability. What you need to know is profitability of a company. Think about it. Is it always a steady growth? It will have fluctuations. Just like how it would have a downfall in terms of profitability, there are also years where you can get a boost, a significant growth in profitability. Why? They would have taken certain strategic decisions. Decisions to enter a new market, decisions to launch a new product, a decision of maybe cost cutting, moving to a very radical scale of cost cutting. So certain events that the company goes through influence profit, and that in turn influence the future dividend ability, and that in turn will affect your market price of the share. Okay. So when you have these events or occurrence which are not unexpected, now as an investor, I don't know what's going through the company, what's going inside the company. Unless the company issues a statement, issues an announcement, we don't know. Okay. So when an event occurs that on an investor point of view unexpectedly changes the market interest rates or a significant characteristics of the company, okay, which will have an unexpected dividend increase in the future or maybe a decrease in default risk, okay, that will cause the current market price to deviate from this present value. It will shoot up. The current market price will change from the actual value of the share. It's a very short term. Let's study about that in detail. Okay. Now, the degree to which the financial security prices adjust to news and the degree and with the speed with which the stock prices reflect information about a firm is referred to as market efficiency. Okay, how quickly can a market react and how quickly can the prices adjust to reflect the news is called the market efficiency. Now, when it comes to market efficiency, it's throughout any market. So that's why I've mentioned here financial security prices. It can be anything. Okay, but here we are going to talk about the stock market efficiency. All right. So an efficient market is defined as a financial market where the asset prices rapidly reflect all public information. The price which you buy today should reflect all information that are publicly available about the issuer or the security. And that is called an efficient market. Okay. This means that all available information is already included in the asset price. So the investor should expect to earn a return so that it will compensate them for the opportunity cost, inflation and the risk only. Okay. It shouldn't compensate them for unknown information. That's what I mean here. As usual, because all information is reflected in the price, there is no information that is unknown to the market. This I'm talking about in a very ideal situation. In an ideal market, efficient market, there is all information are reflected in the price. There is no unknown information to the market. Okay. So the price or the return will compensate them for the opportunity cost, for the inflation or any other risk of holding that asset, but not for any unknown information. Because of that, it won't let the investor earn an abnormal return. Get it? So because of this, chances of earning an abnormal return in an efficient market is less or minimal, near to zero. Before information becomes public, the security has an old value. Now here I hope you could see the diagram clearly. Okay. So here you could see this is the old, this is the past. Okay. So before the information, now this is the news release. Before information comes to the market, the security always has an old value. Okay. The new information hits the market at this point. In an efficient market, all right, highlight the word efficient there. In an efficient market, price instantly adjusts to the new equilibrium. The price will quickly adjust to the price. There is no time to gain an abnormal return. All right. It quickly bounces to the new equilibrium so that it reflects the expected future dividends. So here you can see till this point there was an old value. Moment the news release hits, price increases. There's an immediate reaction to the positive news. So positive news meaning it will increase the valuation of the stock price. And now this is the new price which shows the new market information. All right. The new price part, absence of any further new company information, because we assume this is the only news. It's out, it's known, immediately price changes, and this is the new price. So this is how an efficient market is expected to work. All right. But in reality, it can be different. So here, however, in an inefficient market, investors either overreact or underreact to certain information. Okay. So in such a situation, what happens? An inefficient market will not respond to the information immediately, or it might not react completely. Either the reaction would be delayed or the reaction is not complete. Either it can be an overreaction or an underreaction. That's what I'm referring to. Instead, financial markets may respond gradually and potentially incompletely for a period of time. So it can be for a period of time, this inefficiency will be there. Now this will allow the investor who knows the actual worth of it to play around. That's what the difference is. Understand, in efficient market, there is no room for abnormal return because the market entirely knows all information and it's already reflected in the price. But in an inefficient market, now we are going through that. Investors, we know, can either overreact to a positive news or underreact to a negative news, or it can be an overreaction to a negative news or an underreaction for a positive news. It can be either way, and that can cause a delay in actually reaching the new price. Okay, and that's what we are going to see. Now again, we are going to see a positive news release situation. Each time again now. No, nothing. Okay. So each time a new, now here, okay, we are going to talk about the new positive news release. Again, so here you can see. Now here we are going to see a situation where it's a positive news, but the market has underreacted for it. The market has maybe not fully understood the news, not maybe fully understood the consequences or the benefits that news can bring to the company. So in that, now here you can maybe take a note of it. It's an underreaction to a positive news. So what happens here is, this is the old value of the security. We can see it's a share. If it's a market share, it's a stock market issued equity share. So here it's the old value. So in this old value already, we assume already information is already impounded, all the past information. So moment a new release that the market doesn't know is released, here we can see there is an underreaction. Instead of the what equilibrium told us, there is an immediate price increase. There is no immediate price increase here. Here there is only a gradual reaction, which is also very partial, not at least gradual, not complete. It's incomplete. It's still moving towards the price situation. Okay. So there, in this time gap, in this particular time gap, there is always chance for an investor to get an abnormal return. How? Now think at this point, assume it was 10 rupees. the new efficient price is around 20. But here when the market slowly reacts, it's around 12. A good investor who can understand the real worth of the news will understand that there is an underreaction in the market. He can buy the share at 12, hold till the share actually reflects the new price 20 and sell at a abnormal return just using this news. And that's what we're referring to. They can buy at this point maybe and sell at a much higher price. Okay. So this will cause a situation of abnormal return for them. Now next we are going to see how it will be for a negative overreaction to a positive news. Okay. Now overreaction to a positive news is if there is overreaction, the market price overshoots the new equilibrium. Okay, it immediately overshoots. Now at this time again, assume it's 10 rupees. We assume the efficient price to be 20. Because the information is out, people are so impressed by it, the price shoots to 30 rupees. Assume that here this peak point is 30 at this level. It shoots up so much to 30 rupees. At this point, again, an investor who holds the share at 10 could understand, okay, this is an immediate but a very short-lived increase. A very short-lived increase. They know the real worth is 20, but because of this overreaction, it has gone up to 30. Immediately, they will sell. They will sell and maybe wait till it comes down to the new price to buy again. So it's like 10 rupees, you sell it at 30, you get a 20 rupee return. And then using the same 20 rupees, you buy another share. Okay. So that complete gain, or if not, you would have only had a 10 rupee increase. Now you have a 20 rupee worth share in your hand. So that gain is what can be done in terms of an overreaction to a positive news. Okay. So if market is inefficient, between the time of news revelation, which is at this point, between the time of news revelation and the adjustment. So this would be the adjustment to the new equilibrium value. The informed investors would be able to profit at the expense of the less informed investors. The investors who know the true value of the information can make use of it than the investors who don't have that knowledge. Okay. So this is what we refer to as a stock market efficiency. Similar situation happening in a stock market, we refer to as stock market efficiency, whether it can be inefficient or efficient. Okay. Now in your note, I would have given, I don't have the last week note here. Why? No. So in the note, I would have given you another graph which inculcates all three situations. It will show the immediate price increase, it will show the overreaction and the underreaction. So that will give you an idea on what ways that they can profit. Now the same thing can happen in terms of a negative news as well. Okay. Think if it's a negative news and they overreact and they immediately sell. Think the price is 10 rupees, news comes out, it is negative, no doubt about it, but the investors overreact to the negative news, so they immediately sell. So a 10 rupee share becomes maybe 2 rupees. Ideally, it should come down only to 7 rupees, but they overreact so much, it goes to 2 rupees. What happens? You're going to lose if you hold. But the informed investors who don't have the share, what will they do? They will immediately sell at 10. When it was falling itself, they will immediately sell. Or they will hold. They know this is a short-lived situation. They will hold if they know that there's a sharp drop, immediate drop. They will hold. They know it will recover to 7 rupees. If it's a new investor, they know, oh my God, it's a very rare opportunity. Immediately jump at it, buy at 2 rupees, which was the overreaction price, and then wait till it gradually moves to 7, and they can profit a 5 rupee there itself. It's an abnormal return. Okay. Same thing, negative news, but an underreaction. They don't know the real consequences of the negative issue, the negative news. What happens is a 7 rupee one ideally should go down to 10 rupee share ideally should go down to 7 rupees. Now, but there's an underreaction. The reaction is very slow. It's 10, 9.9, 9.8, very slow. Informed investor, what will they do? They will immediately, they know it's under reaction, cut back losses, immediately sell at that price and get out of the share. Wait till it come down, again at buy at 7. Okay, so that's how they can profit out of this inefficient situation. Now, studying about this inefficiency, Pharma came across a hypothesis or a theory called the efficient market hypothesis. Okay. Now, the underlying norm in this hypothesis is markets are informationally efficient. It reflects information. Okay. So, therefore, abnormal returns cannot be consistently achieved. Okay, given that the information available at the time of investment is made. At the time you make, you can't make an abnormal return because all information is inculcated. But he also studied that there are 3 different degrees of efficiency in terms of financial markets. What are those 3? We have weak form, semi-strong form, and then you have strong form. Okay. Now, under weak form, what Pharma emphasized is markets, yes, it reflects all prices. I mean, all information, the prices, the price of the security reflects all information available, true. But what kind of information does it reflect? It reflects past publicly available information. Now, you need to understand this theory. The theory says, yes, financial markets are informationally efficient, but there are 3 different degrees depending on the type of information for what it is efficient for. Weak form says it reflects, the current market prices reflects all past publicly available information. That means trade related information. All worthwhile information about the previous prices of the stock are already inbounded to the price. Okay, so you can't predict the future movement using the past movement. That's what, so it implies the future price movement are not determined entirely by the past price series because it's already inculcated into the price. So you can't study the past pattern and project the future growth. That's what it means by the weak form. Semi-strong form says, yes, it's past and present information. So which means all publicly available information is reflected in the price. Okay. So that means it will have the past trade information, the price related informations, a big plus. Then you will have public informations relating to announcements of the company, the economic and the political news. So to the equation, you add another plus, you will have the present publicly available information related to the company and the market, economy as a whole. So investors will employ investment strategies based on the publicly available information. Therefore, they can't have an abnormal profit situation. All right. Now, empirical evidence, meaning so much of research done about financial markets, the result of the research is that most of the large world market stocks, stock markets are mostly semi-strong. They always reflect both the past information and the present information. Okay. And then you have the other type. What is that? We have strong form. Strong form of market efficiency. Here what happens is, again, weak form we had only one. We had past information. When we move to semi-strong, we had past plus present. In other words, all publicly available was there under semi-strong. And now when it comes to strong form, another parts get added to the equation. What is that? Private information. If you can highlight this, it's private information. So in other words, here, it's not only public, but it's also private information. So in other words, all information are reflected in the price. So it shows that market knows everything about all securities, even the information that is not released to the public. Okay. Here, now what is the information that is not released to the public? We studied this, which is called inside information. You know, it's not a inside, you can't trade based on inside information. It's unfair, it's illegal. But theoretical per se, pharma says, this third type of degree, this market, every information about this security, everything possible is reflected in the market. It's very rare. Okay, practically I'm talking, it's very, very rare. Even empirical studies say, even the most developed ones still show the semi-strong features, not the strong features. Okay, so here what he means is, because the price reflect all information, even using your inside information, you're unable to make a abnormal return. Okay, you're unable to make an abnormal return on inside information. What is inside information? Information which is not yet public. Now, strong form of market efficiency is not supported by empirical studies. In fact, studies state that the opposite is true. Gains are available from market inside information. Thus, various stock markets, as per empirical evidence, are essentially semi-strong and not strong efficient. Okay. Now, this is a diagram which was in the initial research that was put out. Here you can see the different layers. So, first layer, the very first layer you can see is about weak form. So, weak form is about past prices. Okay. When you move to semi-strong, it's publicly available information. So, that means it is, what it means is, it will have your past information. So, here you will ideally write past prices plus publicly available announcements and news with regarding to the economy and the company. Okay. But what does strong form says? Yes, all publicly available information plus all private information. So it will have all information. So it's 3 levels. Okay. Again, to summarize, in a weak form market, the prices reflect the past price information. So you can't make an abnormal return using the past price trends. Why? The price also already is reflecting for it. But can you make an abnormal return using any other information? Yes. That you need to understand. The theory says is, using the past prices, you can't exceed the market because the price is already shown in it. But if you have some present company announcements, yes, you can make abnormal return. If you have inside information, yes, you can make abnormal return. Okay. Then you move to semi-strong. Semi-strong, what do we say? The price reflects past prices of the stock plus any company announcements, like announcements for a new market, they are launching into a new market, new product. Everything is there in the price. Okay. So you can't overtake the market, or you can't over earn a return, get an abnormal return using these information, using the past or the publicly available present information. You can't get an abnormal return. But if you use inside information, because the price is not yet adjusted for it, you can get an abnormal return. Okay, and that's what this says. The empirical evidence shows, yes, using inside information you can get gains. So that means most markets in the world are semi-strong because the price doesn't yet show the inside information. Okay, but in terms of strong information, there is no chance for you to get an abnormal return. Why? All information possible is shown in the price. Okay, I hope it's clear for you all. So this is what this theory means. It's a very simple theory, but understand what it means, the different types each efficiency says about, and using what information. So in terms of the degree of financial, in terms of degree of market efficiency, what information will not allow you to get abnormal return and what information will help you to get abnormal return. That you need to go through. Okay. So with that, we can wind up the last week lecture. We are done with it. And then we can move to this week's lecture completely. If there is any doubts with the last week, please mention it in the chat. I'll answer them. Last week at the latter part of the lecture, I told you all, I shared my email address. I said I will send out questions for you all, a test question for about 10 MCQs and maybe 5 essay type questions. And I wanted you all to send your email address to mine so I can email it to you. About one actually mentioned in the chat box, the email. I shared the document with them. Only there were about 8 at the letter end. I think many would have left by then. Again, this week I will give out my email address. Please drop an email if you haven't already. Mention your name and the bank. Every week going forward, I will give out a question based on the lectures that we've done, a question series. Okay, so it will be only about, it won't take long. Maximum I'll make sure a 1 hour paper like. So you all can develop your thinking, develop your writing. I will go through that and revert back within the week with the answers for you all. Okay, so that will help you think on how to connect the dots when it comes to the financial market operations and how to write. Because this paper and any paper relating to finance, remember, it's the key terms. If you write the term properly, you are able to score the correct mark. Okay, so before we move on, let me have a small water break. Okay, there were a few who had shared. I will email the document. Okay, so this week we are moving to money market and money market instruments. We saw in our syllabus the first 3 lessons at the very beginning, I told you, are very theoretical. That was how it was. And then now we are going to move into more calculations. We will have money market. Next week we'll study into bonds, and after that equity, derivative, and the structured products. So these lessons are very crucial. It's going to have calculations. I understand in this setup, it's very hard for us to discuss and do calculations. But I have inculcated some calculations to the slides. At least after the lecture, attempt it. And in the weekly questions that I send out, I will definitely have a bit more complicated ones. So it will help you to practice on it. Okay. So now we are going to move on to money markets. So we studied money markets and capital markets under classifications of financial markets, the second lecture. if you can recall. So what was the basis that we split? We said financial markets can be split based on maturity, and using that we came across two classifications. We had financial markets and capital markets. Money market, there is no single definition for money market, but what it means is it's a financial market where debt instruments which will mature less than 1 year are issued and traded. Okay, so in this one particular line, I ask you to highlight issued and traded debt instruments maturing less than 1 year. These three are the keywords. Okay. Now, why I stress here as debt instruments? I've told you at the beginning of the class also, equity is long term. Do you get equity instruments which mature in less than 1 year? No. So equity is always a capital market component. So in terms of money market, remember, we talk about debt instruments which mature in less than 1 year. Okay. So then we move on to certain characteristics of this money market. Money market, you need to know, is a over-the-counter market. Okay, what is meant by over-the-counter market? Again, we went through this. It's a market where transactions don't occur in one particular location. It's not a centralized location. Not a centralized location. Okay, it happens in a decentralized way, mostly through calls and computer arrangements. Okay, so here we have stated purchases and sales between participants over the phone and complete them electronically. And it does not take place in one particular location. So think about what was the example we studied when it comes to over-the-counter market, the foreign exchange market. We studied that you have to talk to authorized dealers, which can be banks, or it can be standalone authorized dealers when it comes to foreign exchange. Each one you will call up, get the exchange rate. It's a one-on-one. So you will have customized answers, customized contracts with the dealer. Okay, but it's not transparent. Okay, those were the characteristics of over-the-counter market. So when I say money market is over-the-counter market, you need to understand that it's not in a central location. It depends on, it's a decentralized. It's one-to-one. The participants over the phone, they contact and they complete the transaction electronically without meeting at one particular location. Okay, it's not centralized. That's the key term. Then you have another characteristic which says it's a wholesale market of short-term debt instrument. What it means is, in this market, there's large amounts of transactions because they transact in very large denominations. Okay, the treasury bills, the commercial papers, everything comes with very large denominations. So this particular market is called the wholesale market for short-term debt instruments. Okay. Here, I think there's a little bit of formatting issue. It's cluttered. Instruments in the financial market. So, all financial market instruments will have certain other features compared to capital market instruments. And what are those? We'll start off with the very simple ones. It's short term. It's less than 1 year. The instruments sold in this market are always less than 1 year. And because it's less than 1 year, and because the issuers are of high credit rating, there is a low risk when it comes to these instruments. Okay, relatively low degree of risk, because why? The issuers have high credit ratings. Now here when I refer to, I'm referring to government issuing treasury bills or commercial papers issued by very good rated companies. Okay, and due to shorter maturities. Now we understood when the maturity is less, you have less prone to inflation risk or interest rate risk. Again, because of that, you as a whole, when it comes to these market, the instruments carry relatively low risk compared to the capital market instruments. And then what we studied was liquidity. These instruments are highly liquid. Why? Because it's again short term. Because it's short term, the realizable value, you can quickly say get your fair value with a lesser cost. Therefore, these instruments are highly liquid. And another feature, what you need to know is these instruments are traded as if it's very close to money. It's nearly substitute for money itself. Okay. Why you need to understand that is money market. The word money market came because this market trades instruments which are so liquid that it can be substituted for money. It's close substitute for money. And because of that, it's called money market. Okay, because of the liquidity. So the instruments are considered close substitute to money. Treasury bills, you have even commercial papers, which are very like 3 months commercial papers. Then you will have repos. All those are considered very close to money. And another particular feature that you come across in terms of money market instruments is discount pricing. Okay, this is important. Discount pricing is because in this particular market, what happens is you will have a fair value to the instrument or a face value to the instrument, but you will issue the instrument at a price lesser than that. And the difference between those two is called the discount or the return for the investor. It's a bit new to this for you all to understand if you didn't know about how treasury bills work. Because what we know is usually we deposit something or you buy a share and the value of that increases and that's your capital gain. Something like that. But in money market, what happens is the instrument that you buy already has a face value. Okay. So when it comes to treasury bill, assume it has 100 rupees. The bill says 100 rupees. That is the value. So on maturity, when it matures, you're going to get 100 rupees. So when the government is issuing the treasury bill, will they issue at 100 rupees itself? No, because at the end of it, you're going to get 100. So they are going to issue at a lower price. They will issue maybe at 90. So the difference between 100 and 90 is the discount or the return. So you get a 100 rupee security at 90. So that is called discount pricing. Some instruments are issued at a discount to the face value of the instrument. As the lender is paid the face value on maturity, the difference is the return earned by the lender. Okay. So this feature is it's kind of specific one when it comes to money market. Now we move to the purpose and role of money markets. Why? Because of money market existing, what good does it do to financial markets? So we can see that money market helps effectively perform the role of monetary policy. Open market operations, everything, it happens based on the money market, the treasury bills. Okay. So the money market acts as the focal point for central bank to influence market liquidity and the general level of interest rates in the economy. Now, why is it general interest rates in the economy? Why are they influencing the general market interest rate using the short-term interest rates? You need to understand that, link the dots. Why? Last week we studied the short-term interest rates give you the indication for long-term. Get it? The expectations theory, for example, we studied that short-term interest rate will give you an indication on where the long-term will move on. So by influencing the short-term interest rate, central bank is able to do that. Okay. So why do they intervene? They intervene to influence the liquidity and the general market interest rates. Another one is signaling. Now the money market interest rate helps to signal the long-term interest rates. Also, it helps you to show what is the money market policy of the what is the monetary policy of the central bank, whether it's relaxed or tightening. What kind of a liquidity is the market in? Those are signaled by the money market. Okay, so there are three types. It will signal on three indications. It will show you how the long-term interest rate is going to move. Then it will show you the liquidity levels where the market is liquid. And then you will have the monetary policy of the central bank. The stance of the monetary policy you can read out. You can maybe identify based on how the central bank is working inside the money market. Okay. Next, you have fundraising. Again, we give more attention here. It's not, the word is not capital raising. Capital raising is wrong. Fundraising, why? Because it's short term. And for what are the funds raised for? It's mainly for their working capital requirements. So it can be firms who want for working capital. Government might want it for their short-term budget deficit. Intermediaries who need the short-term infusion, liquidity infusion, like banks, the interbank money market borrowings. Okay. So in these three parties would maybe intervene to the market. This money market allows them to fundraise for their working capital, for their short-term requirements. That is the purpose again of money markets. Another one is a role that money markets plays is liquidity management for banks. Banks can always use this market to raise funds to meet their SRR, urgent liquidity needs, urgent maturity mismatches that they have using these markets. Then again, we go to the lender point. Okay, to the lender, this market gives an avenue to get short-term investment. Okay, now for the lender, the goal by coming into this market is not earn high return. They can't earn high returns here. Why? You know, compared to capital markets, money market is low risk. And the golden rule is low risk, low return. So in compared to a capital market, returns in money market is always less. Okay. So by coming into a money market, you can't expect to earn higher returns. Okay. But why do you get into the money market anyways? Because it's liquid. Rather than holding money balances, you rather have it in short term and get some interest income. Okay. So the money market allows the investor or the lender to park the funds in short term investments. Okay. That is what I mean by here. Then you have risk management. It's another component. Risk management, what it means is, because money market exists, the parties, the market participants or the lenders, they can use the money market as a way to mitigate risk or to manage risk. Okay, what I mean is, think of a portfolio. You have a portfolio where you have completely invested in capital markets. It's all shares, it's all debentures, all treasury bonds. Okay, and there is nothing for you to, nothing in terms of liquidity, nothing short term. What is the risk that you run? There is a risk of maybe an urgent withdrawal in your portfolio and you're unable to manage it. You can't quickly get out of the share. You can't quickly get out of the debenture. We know in terms of a bond, you could always maybe go for a sale and earn it out. But I'm talking about the other return, other instruments. So you, in that area, you're prone to more risk. Or in terms of maybe shares, especially. If you have a complete share portfolio, it's 100% invested in equity market. You know, equity market fluctuates. You know, after the lockdown or the curfew situation was open, immediately market had a fallout. It immediately dropped. In such a situation, your portfolio will hit a sharp drop. If you have money market investments, it will help you buffer the cushion. It will be a buffer for you. It will be the minimum possible. But if you don't have money market investments, the loss, you will completely lose your investment. Okay, so that is what is meant by risk management. Money market instruments allow market participants to manage the risk in their portfolio while earning adequate return. Adequate return, okay? In other words, presence of money markets allow the lenders to hedge their long-term and riskier investments with short-term investments which are low risk. Okay? I hope you all understood the purpose and the role of it. And now we move on to participants. Who are the participants in the money market? Now, when it comes to in the very first lesson, we went through a diagram in terms of financial system. Okay, we went through the lenders and the borrowers, how they meet. You have financial market. Okay, so now in this lesson, throughout this lesson, visualize that diagram. That diagram tells you now in the middle you had financial market. Now it's going to be money market. Okay, so money market, who are the participants? The important one, we have government. Government, what is the role? Why do they intervene into the money market? They want to issue money market securities and use the proceeds to finance budget deficits. Okay, so that is their role. Central bank, why do they intervene? One is to execute the monetary policy. So then they come in. Then they involve into monetary policy. And the other aspect is, so they issue securities on behalf of the government. So on that scale as well, they participate in money markets. Then you have banks or standalone primary dealers. We will go through that, what they mean by standalone and standalone primary dealers. There, what do they do? Banks come in to manage their short-term liquidity positions and to fulfill their minimum liquidity reserve requirements. If there's any sudden maturity mismatch or mismatch in a shorter time bucket, they get into the money market to bridge that. In terms of primary dealers, banks and the standalone primary dealers act as the intermediary, especially for treasury bills, and they will trade on behalf of their customers. The other participant that we have is other financial intermediaries. So here we cover insurance companies and pension funds and even mutual funds. What is their role? Invest in money market instruments. That is why? To maintain liquidity so they can meet unexpected demands and withdrawals. Again, we studied this before as well when we in the very first lecture, when we studied about types of financial intermediaries. I'll again refresh your memory. Insurance funds and pension funds, they were the non-deposit taking but contractually saving institutions that we studied. Yes. So there we studied these intermediaries prefer to invest long term. Why? Because they already know their withdrawals. They can calculate, they can anticipate their withdrawals. Okay. So in a year, they know, you think about maybe EPF, ETF, they know on average how many people will reach 55, reach the eligibility criteria to claim the fund out. So in that particular year, they will have to set aside some funds for liquidity purposes. So when the withdrawal comes in, they need to meet it. Okay. So can they have funds idling? Can they have it at ready cash and just wait till the person comes to claim it? Imagine there is one person who's retiring in August. So you keep around 10 million worth of his EPF money from January onwards. Is that what they do? No. They will have some portion in money market instruments, which is more liquid. They can take it out anytime they need. So they will split their portfolio in such a way. That's what it meant here. So even to have any unexpected demands or unexpected withdrawals, they will always park funds in money market instruments. And another aspect is they hold money market instruments. Why? So when a good opportunity arises for investment in stocks and bonds, they can utilize it. Okay, instead of putting everything in the market, and then if a new good opportunity comes in, a good bond comes with a good rate, you can't make use of it because you don't have any more funds. So what you apportionate part of it so you can make use of these situations. Okay, then you have companies. Companies, why do they, in the non-financial companies is what I refer here. The non-financial companies, what is their role? They issue money market instruments and use the proceeds to bridge their working capital requirements. Think of a commercial paper issued. Okay, it's issued by non-financial firms. So they issue that to raise their proceeds for their working capital requirements. Okay. And then you have the ultimate lenders. So in your diagram, if in the very first lecture diagram, if you can visualize, we had the lenders. So what is their role? It can be companies, it can be financial intermediaries who are coming in, or the government itself. They will have excess funds that is available for a short-term period, and they will make use of this market to earn an adequate return for that investment. They have excess cash. Now, if the excess cash is an excess situation, which is a long-term situation, then they would maybe park it in a long-term instruments. But if they know this excess situation is a very short-lived situation, they will want to earn, they will want to minimize the opportunity cost and earn some kind of a return, earn at least some interest income out of it. So for that, they can use this market. For example, now you think about a company who has to make a payment to maybe supplier. Now today is June 20th. Think they have to make a payment July 31st or July 20th. They need to pay a supplier for about maybe 10 million. And now they have 10 million in hand. What they could do is they could weigh the consequences, do the calculations. They could either put that to maybe a 1 month fixed deposit, invest in a 1 month commercial paper, hold it for some time, earn a return, and then settle it off. So for the short term excess, they use the short term invest to put it as an investment and an additional return. Okay. And then, sorry, there's another point which is not visible. Individuals. So we studied about all the other, we studied about companies, financial intermediaries, and the government. The individuals as the ultimate lender. Now for them, now we understood money market is a large denomination market, it's a wholesale market. So for them, it's a very limited role in the market. Okay. For them, investing is done through dealers. Dealers here, what I'm referring, can think about primary dealers, but there you will have to maybe have a larger denomination. It must be in millions. But if you have a shorter excess, think of maybe 5 lakhs, still you can invest in money market using what? Using money market funds. These are funds or portfolios maintained by mutual fund companies. These funds are made, they pool funds to be collected into money market instruments. Okay. So that's how individuals or the standalone small investor could get into the money market through these two ways. Okay. Using money market funds. Money market funds, if you can read up the paper, I'm pretty sure on every day when you get a Daily Mirror or FT, on the side of it, you will see First Capital Money Market Fund, you will have HNB, you will have NDB Money Market. They have funds which will pool funds from small investors and then invest in these large denominations. That usually earns a higher return than maybe your savings account. Okay. So with that, I think we are done with the introductory. Now we are going to move into money market instruments. Okay. Anything unclear till now? Please put a message in the chat box. Okay. Money market instruments. Today in this lesson, we are going to go through the 7 types. There are 7 money market instruments: treasury bills, commercial papers, repurchase agreements, certificates of deposit. It's also called CDs, CD, interbank loans and deposits, euro currency instruments. We studied these in the very first and the second lectures as well. Euro currency. It's you can also call it international money market instruments or securities, and bankers acceptance. These are the 7. Now what you need to know is it's an instrument, right? It's a money market instrument. So these are interest bearing or return bearing. Okay. When you invest, you will earn a return. Now this return, how it is calculated, is of 2 types in terms of money market. We studied that under characteristics as well, discount pricing. So money market instruments, there are significant 2 ways, distinct 2 ways on how money market instruments are quoted. It's an add-on rate or a discount rate. Okay. When you say add-on rate, think of a fixed deposit. You put money and at the end of the maturity, you get the invested money with interest. Interest is added on. That's what you call as add-on rates. Okay. But discount rate is you buy an instrument with a face value at a lower price, and at the end of maturity, you get the face value. Difference is the discount. So that is called discount rate. Okay. So these are the ones. So I have classified the instrument based on it, excluding the euro currency. Another point I want you all to know is certificate of deposit. Just put an asterisk here. I will come back when we're discussing on this, because this instrument has add-on features and discount features. Okay. So just put an asterisk there. We will come back there and maybe write a note on it. So when you all go through at a future date, it will be clear for you all. Okay. So the very first one that we are going to go through is treasury bills. Treasury bills, often referred to as T-bills, are securities which are with a maturity less than 1 year. But the feature here is it's issued by governments through their central bank. Okay. Issued by the government through their central bank. In Sri Lanka, treasury bills are issued as 91 days, 182 days and 364-day bills. Okay. And it's used to raise short-term funds for budget deficit financing requirement and for maturing treasury securities. Okay. So if you are going to issue a new instrument to raise funds so that they can settle off a maturing treasury bill, it's also called as refinancing. Maybe you can underline that and use the word refinancing there. That's the purpose of it. So you can issue a treasury bill to get funds to meet your budget deficit, yes, or you can issue a new treasury bill, get the proceeds and settle off existing treasury bill. Okay. Now here what I wanted you all to go through is, now this was released this week. It's a notice by, it was published by Central Bank. Can you all see it? If you all can't, mention it. Okay. If you all can't, just mention it. So here you all can see it's 91 days, 182 days, and 364 days is the usual maturity period. Another point I want you all to note is ISIN. What does it mean? It means International Securities Identification Number. It's mentioned here. Write it down. ISIN. What does it refer to? International Securities Identification Number. Each security has a specific number for identification purposes, just like how we have ID numbers. Okay. So these were the identification codes issued. There's a certain way of reading it. Now, this is for your practical knowledge I'm sharing. The first two always shows the country. So here it's Sri Lanka, Lanka, LK refers to Lanka. So this security is issued in Sri Lanka. So that's what it says, LK. Then you have A here. And if you see a treasury bond, it will say B. If it's A, it's a treasury bill. If it's B, it's treasury bond. That's how they classify it. Okay. And then you have the next three numbers. The next three numbers is the tenor. Can you see? 91 days, so it's 091. 182 days, it's 182. 364, here is 364. Okay. So by looking at the ISIN, you can see the country that issued it. You can see whether it's a treasury bill or a treasury bond. And you can see the maturity. It's a 91-day bill or a 182-day bill or a 364-day bill. Okay. And then, can you see something here called 20I, 20L, 21F. Now this 20 refers to the year, the last two digits of the year. Now this particular treasury bill is going to mature in this year itself. Okay. This particular treasury bill also is going to mature in 2020 itself. But the 1 year one is going to mature in 2021. Okay. But in what month is referred to by the letter. They start January with A and they move on. So this particular letter will tell you what month it's going to mature. Okay, so January will be A, February B, March C, April D, May E, and F as June. So here you will have F. This is June, next year June. So they issue it here today, this month. This is the next year June maturing bond. The last two are the serial. The last three numbers will be the serial code. Okay. So using ISIN number, you can get most of the detail of the treasury bill or even a treasury bond. Okay. Same thing applies to a treasury bond. Only differentiating factor is you will have B here. Again, the first 3 year will tell you the tenor. Whether it's a 5-year, 30-year, 2-year bond, the tenor is referred by that. And then you have the maturing time, the year and the month. Okay. No treasury bills are usually issued on Wednesdays. Settlements happened on Fridays. Okay. So out of this one notice, you can get so much of information. That's what we are trying to link what we study with the practical situation. And also note this, we study these large denominations. See, it's a 27 billion treasury bills being issued. Okay. And what is the minimum bid? Minimum bid is 5 million. So it's a larger denomination. If you don't have 5 million, you can't bid. And it's multiples of 1 million that you are going to bid for. The further bid, it's in multiplication of 1 million that the bid is going to be. But the minimum is 5 million. Okay. Then another feature that we can study in terms of treasury bills is that the treasury bill released in their own currency. If a government issues the treasury bill in their own domestic currency, that treasury bill is known as the safest of all possible investment in that currency. Why? Why? We know treasury bill issued by a government or any security issued by a government carries zero default risk. We know it's zero credit risk. There won't be a default. Here especially, because it's in your domestic currency, you can say that. Why? We know because it's in our own currency, the government can always print the currency and repay. If they don't have funds, as a last way, they could always print money and repay the investors. Okay, so this treasury bills considered as default risk free. Okay, default risk free, and the rate is called risk free rate or the default risk free rate. Okay, but think of a treasury bill issued by the government, but it's not in our own domestic currency. It's a foreign currency. Think Sri Lankan central bank issues a dollar denominated treasury bill. Okay, dollar denominated. What happens again? Is it default risk free? No. Why? Why am I saying it's not default risk free? Because can the government print dollars? No. So how can they refinance? They should either raise the money, maybe use their reserves, or raise money through refinancing, issuing a new treasury bill. If they are unable to meet it, there will be a default situation. Think they release a treasury bill with dollar terms and the investors are not attractive enough to invest in it. They are unable to get the quantum that they expect. What happens? Money raised is not enough to repay the other. A default situation arises. So in this particular instrument, treasury bills denominated in foreign currency than the issuing country, there you can't say it's default risk free. It has default risk involved in it. Okay. Another one that I want you all to know is, even when it comes to treasury bills in their own currency, when we say risk free, what it means is no default risk. Does that mean there's no other risk in this instrument? No. You always have inflation risk, interest rate risk, all the maturity risk, even though it's short term, you are prone to that. But in terms of credit risk, we say no. There is no credit risk involved because it's issued in your own currency. The government can always print the currency in even the worst situation and repay. Okay. Now here, treasury bill market has both primary and secondary markets. Okay, what's primary and secondary market? We studied it. Primary market is where instruments are issued for the very first time. It's also called the new securities market. And it's the secondary market. What does that mean? Trading between investors. That's what we refer to as secondary market. Okay. So treasury bill also has these two types. In the primary market, central bank on behalf of the government will issue the treasury bill via a regularly scheduled auction process to the registered primary dealers. So here the issuer will issue to the primary dealer, that is the primary market. In the secondary market, the primary dealers will trade the treasury bill to the investors. Okay, so primary dealer is like the intermediary. Issuer and the primary dealer we refer to as primary market. Primary dealer and the investor we call the secondary market. Now registered primary dealers, it can be banks and it can be standalone primary dealers. If you can remember, here I use the word banks and standalone primary dealers. Both these parties are called registered primary dealers. Registered primary dealer can be a bank or a standalone primary dealer. Okay. I wanted you to go through that. These are the authorized primary dealers as per central bank website. Okay. So you have, these are the banks who have the primary dealer units. You have Bank of Ceylon. This is a standalone. Capital Alliance is a standalone primary dealer. Commercial Bank is a bank. So, you have banks with primary dealer units, and then you have the standalone primary dealers like Capital Alliance and First Capital. Know that there are 15 registered, 15 authorized primary dealers, but out of that 4 are suspended. Entrust Securities is refrained, and then you have NatWealth was suspended from 1st June, and then you have Pan Asia Primary Dealer Unit suspended, and then you have Perpetual Treasuries was suspended. And another one, if you can recall the current events around in April, you can recall Union Bank submitted to stop their primary dealer unit. The bank itself made the decision for that. So even though they're listed here, they don't have a primary dealer unit anymore. So it's effectively only 10. So you can see in this notice earlier, they would have listed the primary dealers. So you have only 10 primary dealers mentioned out of the 15 in the website. Why? 4 are suspended. 1 does not operate with a primary dealer unit anymore. Okay. Now in the second lecture, I would have made a note for you all saying primary and secondary classification is usually available for capital markets. Okay. If you have the note with you, go through that. Under the primary and the secondary classification, I would have mentioned it to you. Usually, the private and the secondary classification can be done to a capital market. Okay. In the money market, I didn't make the explicit statement there. Why? Because in the money market, it is for treasury bills and for certificates of deposits, you have the secondary markets available. So it's only for these particular instruments that you have that classification. Just make a note of it somewhere. In money market, the classification as primary and secondary is available only for treasury bills and certificates of deposits. Okay. You can have for banker acceptance, but it's very rare. It's very limited as well. So treasury bills have active and liquid secondary market, because the moment primary dealers buy from the central bank, the primary market doesn't stop there itself. The trade effects here. So this secondary market is highly active and most liquid. Okay. And another term that you need to go understand in terms of treasury bills is on the run issues. What does it mean? The most actively traded bill in the secondary market is always or is usually the bill that was recently released. Okay. The ones sold most recently through the auction are the ones that are most actively traded. And that's what you call as on the run issue. So study that this on the run meaning it's a recently issued treasury bill, and these are the ones that most actively traded in the secondary market. So think of this notice. They're going to release it next week. You have next Friday the settlement, and then maybe from the first week of July, the most actively traded could be these instruments. Okay. And then we move to calculations. Okay. So what you need to know is treasury bills, the return, how you get a return out of it. Again, we discussed it earlier as well. Treasury bills have a face value. Okay. They have a face value. Assume it's 100. That the government, when the central bank is issuing, they will issue at a lesser price. 100 face value treasury bill will maybe issued at 90 rupees. So when the primary dealer buys at 90, hold for maybe 3 months, it's a 3-month security, and hold for 3 months. At the end of 3 months, they get 100. Okay, 90, they get the face value at the end of maturity. This is called discount. There is no any, this is the only interest component. There is no any calculated added on interest, no. What I mean is, in terms of maybe a fixed deposit scenario, you don't have a interest calculated on the face value to be given to you, no. So there is no coupon. So these kind of instrument, treasury bills, is also called as zero coupon instrument. Understand, if it's a zero coupon instrument, these instruments are not interest bearing, they trade at a discount. Discounting process is how you earn a return out of these instruments. Okay. So treasury bills are discount instruments. Rather than making interest payment, they are issued at a discount to face value and mature at face value. Okay. Discount is the difference between face value and the purchase price of the treasury bill. So if you want to know the discount rate as a percentage, now this is what? This is discount as an amount. If you can just mention it, that discount as an amount is the difference between face value and the purchase price. Okay. Discount as a percentage, you now have to do a calculation. What? You will have the discount as an amount, divide that by the face value. Please highlight this if you can. This here, the denominator is face value, and then you multiply it by 360. I want you to highlight 360 and divide that by days to maturity. What is happening here? We know that treasury bills are less than 1 year traded instruments. So you have to always annualize, okay, the return that you will calculate just based on this alone is not a 1 year rate. Okay, you know interest rates, but mathematically we know it's an annual thing. When you quote interest rate, you refer to a per annum rate. Okay, so here the calculation yields, what it yields is for the days to maturity only. So you have to annualize it. For you to annualize, what do? You divide by, you multiply it by 360, but then you divide it by the days to maturity. It can be 90 days, it can be 182, or it can be 360 itself. Okay. But here again, highlight 360. I need to stress that 360 and face value, because this is what the changing component is when you go to the further formulas. Okay. Holding period yield. Holding period yield is not annualized. It's the rate of return that the investor is receiving by just holding the instrument. By holding the instrument for the particular period, what kind of a return is he going to get? So, in this calculation, you can see in this formula, you can't see a multiply into 360, 365 component is not there. Why? Because this is unannualized. Okay. So how do you calculate holding period yield? Yield is always a return divided by investment. That you need to know. When you say yield, the term yield, you calculate it based, how do you calculate? You understand what is the return this investment is going to get for me and what is the investment value. That's how you compare. Okay. So in a treasury bill, we know what is my return. It's going to be discount, the discounting in terms, in the amount wise. So you will have discount. Okay. And what is my investment value? Sorry, what is my investment value? What you're going to invest, at what are you going to buy it? Is it face value? No. Face value is going to be the maturity. So what is the investment value? That's going to be your purchase price. Okay. Now, do you need a 365 component here? No. Why? It's holding period. It's unannualized. So we stop from here itself. So there you can see, this is the formula. You will have discount divided by purchase price, or this is all face value minus purchase price divided by purchase price. Okay. Understand that when you understand a certain concept, it's very easy for you to think. Yield is always return compared to investment. So here, what is my return? The discount. What is your investment? That's the purchase price that you pay to get the treasury bill. Okay. And because it's unannualized, there is no annualizing component, no component of being converting into 365. Okay. And then you have the annual yield, the investor required return. Okay. Now this is the annualized version of the holding period yield. So simply you can see holding period yield, when you put a component to convert it into for a year, annualize it, you get the annual yield. But again, I want you to know what I want you to highlight here is purchase price and 365. Now earlier we saw it was face value and it was 360. But here it's going to be discount again here on top, but it's going to be purchase price and 365. Okay. Why is it purchase price? Here you're going to talk about yield. When you are talking about return, you talk in comparison to your investment. So your investment is purchase price. Why is it 365? Here you're going to talk about your return. Return is always annualized. You talk about 365 days before. Therefore, okay. So here you mention that. It's always calculated for 365. Here you annualize in terms of the treasury bill itself. Okay. So discount rate, you need to know the discount rate. Therefore, you don't match it with your purchase price. It's face value. Based on the face value, what kind of a discount is it given? Okay. So yield is dependent on the purchase price and the face value, because why? Purchase price will give you the investment, purchase price and the value will give you the discount, and the time remaining till maturity. Now days to maturity is the time that is left till the instrument matures. Now if it's a newly issued instrument, think it's an instrument of 91-day treasury bill. It's newly issued. So time to maturity is 91 itself. But as you hold, days to maturity will be shorter. Okay. So these are the three ways. Depending on the information available, it will be different. So this is the elongated version. You will have face value minus the purchase price, that's your return, divided by your investment into the annualized component. So 365 divided by days to maturity. So the simplified is discount is inserted here. Now the more simplified is, we know this is what? This is holding period yield. So then you substitute holding period yield here. Remember here it's a percentage. Okay. Percentage, and that you multiply with the annualizing component. Okay. I hope it's clear. Now we are moving to finding the price of treasury bill. Okay. Now what do you mean by price of treasury bill? Now remember this purchase price. Now when we discuss this, we knew that. We knew the purchase price, we knew the face value, we knew the time remaining till maturity. Okay. Now here what we know is, we don't know the price of treasury bill. How are we going to calculate it? Okay. Understand this. Price that the investor is willing to pay depends on the required rate of that investment. Last week that we studied, what? We know interest rate and price is inversely related. I wanted you all to make a note of it. Similarly, the return required rate of an investment and the price are linked, but it's a negative. When the investor wants a higher required return, the price of the instrument falls. We will see why, but understand this is the inverse relationship. We will see why that is happening when we move on to the calculations. Okay. So here there are three instances. These are the derivations I did. If the sum gives you the discount rate, not the discount amount, face value and the days to maturity, you can use this equation. Okay. If it's only face value and holding period yield, you could use this. And if it's only face value, annual yield and the days to maturity, this is the formula that you can use. Now, you don't have to memorize this formula. Now, these were derivation out of these. Okay. Now, what I did was I made your life easier by deriving it. Because at the exam, like what I told you earlier, knowing practice is easier than you actually deriving formulas at the exam. Okay. So, this is how you calculate purchase price or the price of a treasury bill. 3 scenarios. Now here you can easily see the relationship. When the holding period yield increases, price of the treasury bill falls. That's one relationship. Okay, that's mathematically I'm talking. Again here, when the annual yield increases, price of the treasury bill also falls. Okay. Now we are going to move to some calculations. If you can do the calculations, try to do it at your own time and space, because I understand it's only 2 hours that we have here. So I'll just go to the questions, the basic ones. Suppose you buy a 360-day treasury bill at a price of 95 and the face value is 100. Calculate the discount rate. So here you have discount in amount, which is 5 rupees. Discount rate is 5 divided by face value, remember, into 360 is the numerator, but divided by days to maturity. Okay, so here it's a new issue that you're buying it, so it's a 360 that you will insert here. So then you have 5%. What is the HPY, which is called holding period yield? There you have your return, which is the discount, divided by the investment, which is 95 rupees, into 100%. Okay. Why this comes in decimal, you convert it into a percentage. So it's 5.26. Calculate the yield of the security. Yield meaning the required rate. Again, it's this, the very same one, but you multiply it by 365 divided by 360 days to maturity. Then you get 5.34. Okay. Then you have another calculation. Suppose you buy a 182-day treasury bill at the price of 95 and a face value of 100. What is the scenario? Here you have a shorter tenor. Again, discount in amount will be the same, but discount rate you can see is a bit higher. Here it was 5. Here it's 182. Why? By holding a 1-year treasury bill, you are only getting a discount of 5. Here, by holding a 6-month treasury bill, you are getting that. Okay. So here anyway, the discount rate is higher. They have steeply discounted it. Okay. What is the holding period return? 5.26. So this will be similar to this. Why? You don't annualize it. Okay. But again, here what you need to know is you calculate the yield, the return. Return is doubling of this, nearly the double. Why? By holding a treasury bill for only 6 months, you are able to get the same absolute terms, 5 rupees, out of a 95 rupee investment. But here you will get the 5 rupee return from a 95 rupee investment after 1 year. Okay. So the yield is here low, here the yield is higher. Okay. Hence keeping all other variables constant. Here only the maturity is changing. Okay. The other question is, how do you calculate purchase price? Here I have not done the in detail calculations. I want you all to attempt it in all 3 ways. I have given information. It's a 91-day treasury bill, face value of 100, elongated discount rate, the holding period yield, and the annual yield. What I want you all to do is separate these 3 methods and find. Practice it. Okay. Before we move to commercial papers, I want you all to go through this. I want you all to know certain relationships when it comes to treasury bills. Now, note, it's a newly issued 182-day treasury bill. Okay, it's an ideal example that I'm taking. Face value is 100. Price of the treasury bill is 90 when they issue. So what is the days to maturity is 182. It's a newly issued bill. So based on this scenario, what is the discount? You minus face value, you minus the price from the face value, it's 10 rupees. Okay. What is the discount rate? I just take 10 divided by face value into 365 divided by 182 days to maturity. So there you get a discount rate of 19.8. Okay. What's the holding period return? Simple, 10 divided by 90. Price of the treasury bill. Okay. What is the yield? 10 divided by 90, but now you're going to annualize it. So you will have 365 here divided by 182. So you will have 22.3. Okay. So the same scenario, I'm copying it here. Remember, when the days to maturity decreases, price of the treasury bill increases. If you can, just write it somewhere. Why? Because think of a rational investor. Think about you. If you buy a 6-month treasury bill at 90 days, and now when the time moves on, time to maturity is now only about 3 months more. In another 3 months, you will get the face value. But you want to get out of this treasury bill. Will you sell at the same price that you bought at 90 itself? No. Because you're going to forego that discount you're going to get at maturity, you will plug it into the price. So you will sell it at a higher price. Okay. So imagine here it's going to be 95 and here it's going to be maybe 30. Okay, sorry. Here maybe think 91. Okay. When the days to maturity drops, price also increases. Price increases. Why? You can see in this chart. This is another example. I will go through in detail. When this is the days to maturity, 182, 91, and 15. When it's closer to 0, what happens? The price will keep coming close to 100. This is the price line, the one in black. Okay. Price will keep coming close to 100. Why? It has to move in that direction. Why? Because you are foregoing, you're not going to earn the discount. You're going to sell the instrument to another investor. So at that point, will you sell at 90 itself and not earn a return? No. You will settle at a premium, maybe 95, the ongoing price. Okay. So when days to maturity decreases, price increases. Okay. And at the same time, when the days to maturity is decreasing, your yield will also drop. Why? If you buy a secondary market instrument, which has, you have paid a higher price for it. Remember, you didn't buy it at the issue price, you bought it at the market price. Because the market price is higher, your yield is also going to be lesser. Why? You paid a higher price, so your discount is going to be lesser. Now here you had 10 rupees, now you're only going to have 5 rupees. Even though the discount rate is same, but here what you're going to do is you're going to compare with your purchase price, with your investment. 5 rupee divided by 95. There you will have a lesser return. Okay, so now here I have specifically, let's move on to this example. It's much more clear. Here I have taken one treasury bill, 182 is the situation. When it becomes 92 days to maturity, now this is a newly issued. When it becomes 91, price has increased. Days to maturity has dropped. Face value remains the same. Here discount rate also has been adjusted, but highlighting point here is holding period return and the annual yield. Both of them drop. Why? Because you pay a higher price. The return that you are going to earn, the return is less. The discount percent, the amount is less. Okay. Same situation with this. And again, similar is in Treasury Bill B. That is what I've done in a graphical form here. Okay. So here you can see the price movement to the days to maturity and the yield movement. Okay. When the days to maturity 182 becomes 91 and 15, the yield keeps dropping. Okay. Why? Price increases. Because of that, yield also decline. Now imagine this situation. You are 1 day to mature. Okay. Now tomorrow they are going to pay the face value. At this point, you definitely know it's going to be either 99, closer to the price. So you maybe 1 rupee divided by 99, your yield is very less. Okay. So that is what it's being referred. Now here, longer the period, more the return. Just remember riding the yield curve, what we studied. Exactly similar to that. Now here, because you would have, he would have bought at 90, you can sell at 95 and get out. Okay. These are the small understandings that you can get from the relationship. So if you can make a note of it after question number 3, what you can know about, what you can study out of the calculations is the price increases when days to maturity declines. Okay, that is one thing. And another one is when the price increases, annual yield drops. Always inversely related. Okay. And another one I want you all to know is the discount rate. Okay. Discount rate is always lower than the yield or the required rate. Okay. Here also you can see. Those are the 3 learnings. Now the third one, why? Because you can see this even mathematically. Okay. Mathematically, look at this equation. You are going to match your discount with a face value. Face value is higher. But in terms of yield, you are going to match it with your price. Okay. So when you match it with price, which is low, obviously this yield is higher than your discount rate. Okay. Discount rate you talk from in terms of the face value. But yield you talk from the other point, from the investment perspective. So from investment perspective, always the yield is higher than the discount rate. Okay. Those are the 3 learnings that you can get from the calculation. So practice the calculations your way as well. Again, in this week, when I send out the questions, you all can practice in that as well. But for the ones who didn't send out the emails last week, I'll be sending the last week along with this week one, so you will have 2 papers to do. Try to catch up. Okay. And then we move to commercial papers. Commercial papers, now it's only 10 minutes till class finishes. We'll go through this, maybe the first bit, and we'll go through the calculations next week. Commercial papers, what you should know is it's unsecured. Okay. Is there any? Okay, I will send out. Okay, so these commercial papers, it's unsecured short-term debt instrument issued by non-financial firms. I highlighted this before as well. These are the 3 keywords in this slide. Why non-financial firms? Think of firms like John Keel, SoftLogic, not banking sector, not those. It's issued mostly by the non-financial firms. Okay, and it's unsecured. We will compare this with repos and see, but understand these instruments are not backed by a security. Okay. So in most cases, commercial papers have a maturity or a lifetime of 90 to 9 months. So it's 3 months to 9 months is the time gap that they issue commercial papers in practically. Okay. Commercial papers are usually unsecured and issued by large credit-worthy companies. Because it's issued by credit-worthy companies which have good credit ratings, the rating itself is able to become, it's okay for the investor to get into the instrument. You don't need additional security. The rating is the security for them. Okay. The main advantage is that it allows financially sound companies to meet short-term financing at lower rates than borrowing from banks. Okay. Now, when you borrow from banks, you know you will have to give securities, or the rate that they give is usually higher. But here, because you are a very good rated company with a with no collateral, you can raise money at a lower cost than going from the bank. Okay. It's common for the issuer to roll over the commercial paper, where issuers use the proceeds of a new issue to repay the previous issue. Now, this is a very common practice. What they do is they issue a commercial paper, and to settle that, they issue another commercial paper. So basically, what are they doing? They are borrowing money which they for a longer period, but they will roll over. Okay, so they benefit out of the short-term rates rather than borrowing directly for long-term. What they do is they borrow short-term and they refinance. So that's why. So in effect, this allows the issuer to borrow money for long periods at short-term rates, which will be significantly lower than long-term rates. Okay. Even though unsecured, the short-term nature of the instrument and the credit rating with the worthiness of the issuer lowers the risk perceived by the investors. Okay. Because it is because of this that they're okay with accepting an unsecured instrument, because they view it as a low risk instrument. Why? Issued by a good credit rated company, and then it's a lesser maturity as well. Okay. Point to note is commercial papers don't have a secondary market. Okay. Unlike treasury bills, no secondary market for commercial papers. But just like treasury bills, commercial papers are also sold at a discount to its maturity value, and they mature at face value. Thus, it is the other money market instrument whose rate is expressed as a discount basis. Remember the first table that we went through? So we had treasury bills. Now it's commercial papers. Okay. Now it's commercial papers that has a discount rate. And because of that, you can always use the calculations that we mentioned in treasury bills for this. So now next week we will go through these questions in detail, but because you have time, use the same formulas, attempt these questions for commercial papers. Now this is a new component, finding the face value. So I've included the equation as well, attempt it, but we will go through each question next week. Okay, so with that we'll wind up. Next week we'll restart from this particular section. So many of you have sent me the email. Thank you. But if you can drop me, it's a bit difficult for me to get the email addresses from here and type it out. So drop me an email to this particular email address, mention your name and mention your bank to this particular email address, and I will send up. For the ones who didn't send me the email address last week, you all will get that material as well. The ones who sent out last week, I will send you all the this week test paper. Okay. Now this will be sent out to you all by tomorrow around 8 o'clock. By Wednesday, revert to me with the answered paper. Before Friday, I'll get back to you with the corrections. Okay. So with that, we'll wind up for today. Thank you for listening. Attempt the questions and we'll catch up next week with side 17. Okay. Have a good day then. Bye.